Have you ever been in a room full of people who call themselves family and still felt completely invisible? It's strange how silence can speak louder than words, how a glance, a pause, or a single comment can echo deeper than a shout. Sometimes it's not what people say, but what they don't say that stays with you. Before we dive into today's story, one that took an unexpected turn from quiet rejection to something far more powerful, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? I'm always amazed by how these stories travel, finding their way into living rooms, kitchen tables, or late-night headphone moments all across the country. And if you've ever found yourself quietly pushed aside, if you've ever had to stand tall when no one clapped or chose to stay when everyone turned away, then this story might feel a little too familiar. So if it speaks to you, even just a little, consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It helps more people find stories that feel like theirs, even when they don't know how to say it out loud. Now, let me tell you about the day I was asked to step out of the family photo, and how, without knowing it, that moment put me exactly where I was meant to be. The sun was unreasonably bright that morning, painting the lake in shimmering gold like the universe had dressed up for the Carter family reunion. The kind of day people write into movie scripts: kids running barefoot on grass, old stories floating on barbecue smoke, laughter echoing off dock pillars. But beneath the pleasantries and potluck smiles, I felt it, the familiar undercurrent. That hum of tension that always seemed to curl around my ribcage whenever I stood too long among them. Grandma June's lake house hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Whitewashed porch swing, faded turquoise shutters, that rusty wind chime that used to scare me during storms. Everything frozen in time, except the people inside. They'd grown shinier, glossier, like they'd all been professionally retouched over the years. New veneers, bigger SUVs, children with names that sounded like luxury handbags. I parked a few yards down the drive, deliberately avoiding the gravel circle where the real families clustered. SUVs with decals of stick figure clans and bumper stickers declaring my kid made honor roll at Whitmore Prep. I walked in with a bottle of wine from a boutique shop I couldn't afford and a peach cobbler I baked myself. Not store-bought. I made it the night before, in a kitchen where I dance barefoot to vinyl and think about color palettes and branding fonts. The kind of kitchen no one here ever asks me about. Mom barely looked up from her folding chair as I approached. She sat curled beside Rick, my stepfather in paperwork, a stranger in every other respect. He didn't stand, didn't nod, just stared past me like I'd interrupted his sunbathing. "Oh hey sweetie," Mom said absently, already shifting her gaze back to whatever conversation Madeline was leading near the buffet. I set down the wine and cobbler. No one touched them. Madeline stood tall in a crisp cream blouse, clipboard in hand like she was directing a corporate retreat. Her husband Greg, the dentist with a god complex and a Bluetooth headset, was taking calls even here. Their twin boys, Camden and Carter, yes, Carter, squealed over a sprinkler like it had been imported from the moon. "Okay, everyone," Madeline chirped. "Photos before the food, so no one has barbecue sauce on their shirts." Cameras flashed, people posed. She called out names like she was orchestrating a royal decree. Grandma with the grandkids, siblings next, spouses, smile y'all. I stood back, sipping lukewarm lemonade, waiting for my cue. Then came the words. "All right, let's do direct family. Brooke, maybe just step out for this one." It was too casual, too rehearsed to be accidental. The wind stalled, a few heads turned, a cousin's wife shifted uncomfortably and looked down at her sandals. I stared at her, my mouth parted. "I am family." Madeline didn't even flinch. "Yeah, but not nuclear family. We're just doing tight shots." She said it like I should have known better, like I'd embarrassed her. Tight shots, not blood, not bond, just branding. I looked at Mom. She was busy straightening Rick's collar. So I stepped back. Not all at once, but inch by inch, the way you do when you're trying to leave your own skin without making a scene. The air felt different where I stood now, colder despite the sun. The gravel crunched under my flats, echoing like judgment. My smile stayed frozen for a beat too long, like I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry or throw the lemonade in someone's face. But I did none of that. I just folded my arms as if that could hold me together. I watched them pose without me. The shutters clicked. The photographer, some guy they'd hired, probably through one of Madeline's fancy mompreneur Facebook groups, gave the thumbs up. And I stood there, wondering how I could be erased from a photo taken on land where I learned to ride a bike. No one asked me to come back into the frame. Not once. I used to believe family meant something sticky and unconditional, something that stayed even when things got messy. But now it felt like a group subscription I'd failed to renew. Like I'd missed a payment in the form of a marriage license, a baby, or a six-figure income. I wasn't just outside the shot, I was outside their story. And still, I stood there. Not because I wanted to, but because walking away would have meant they won. Because somehow, in some deeply buried place, I still craved their recognition. Not applause, just presence. Just for someone to say, "Broke, come on, what are you doing over there? You're one of us." But no one did. They moved on to candids, laughing and hugging and fake candidating their way into another memory I wouldn't be part of. I looked down at my cobbler, untouched. And I thought, this is what invisible feels like, sweet, warm, and ignored. My heart pulsed with a slow, bitter rhythm. I wasn't hurt. I was angry. And anger? Anger has a way of blooming into something sharp and undeniable. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything started to shift. I stood beneath the low-hanging branches of a weeping willow, its tendrils brushing my arms like some half-hearted attempt at comfort. The family, my family, was lined up in calculated symmetry on the hill above, bathed in golden light. Their coordinated pastels glowed against the green of the lawn like they'd been dipped in some Instagram filter, curated and polished for strangers to admire. It was the kind of scene that would get framed above a mantle or uploaded with a caption like #FamilyFirst. Except it wasn't. Not really. The photographer, Luke, I remembered his name now, though I hadn't meant to, called out directions with a cheerful ease. "Chin up, Greg. There you go." And everyone turned just a bit to the left. Perfect. He moved like someone used to being obeyed, like his voice carried a kind of authority, gentle but absolute. And they all listened. Every one of them shifted and smiled on cue, turning their faces toward him, away from me. As if the moment I stepped out of the frame, I ceased to exist, not just excluded, unacknowledged. It reminded me so sharply of high school that my stomach curled. Prom night, I'd spent a month working on that dress, thrifted lace I hand-dyed in my bathtub, seams I stitched under the hum of midnight podcasts. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And I walked in feeling like I'd finally carved out a space in the world that looked like me. Then Madeline, with her crystal heels and salon updo, turned to her friend and whispered, "She looks like a Pinterest fail." I had smiled, just like I did now, as though the words didn't land. Then I locked myself in a bathroom stall and cried until the paper towel dispenser ran dry. That same tight, aching knot lodged itself in my throat now, though no tears came. I had learned better. Instead, I shoved my hands deep into the pockets of my skirt and kept them there, fingers digging into the fabric like claws into bark. My jaw locked so tightly I felt a tremor in my teeth. Still, no one looked my way. Not my mother, who stood with Rick like they were the poster couple for late life's second chances. She wasn't even pretending to scan for me. Not Aunt Grace, who used to braid my hair on summer afternoons when my father worked late. She'd slipped into a polite smile, nodding toward the lens like her neck was hinged. And not Jason, my brother, my only sibling. He caught my eye for one fleeting second, a glance that lasted just long enough for me to register the apology buried in it, before he draped his arm around his girlfriend and leaned in for the shot. That small gesture hurt worse than the rest. Jason and I had built sandcastles on this very lawn as kids, had secret words and midnight whispers, had made plans to escape these gatherings and live differently. But time had folded him back into the mold, clean-cut, presentable, emotionally outsourced. I took a breath that scraped like gravel through my lungs and turned away. The dock was weathered, boards soft underfoot, every nail rusted but holding firm. I walked slowly, as if each step were a question I wasn't ready to answer. The lake glittered in the late afternoon light, uncaring and infinite. I stared out at it, letting my eyes go soft. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because I needed something bigger than this moment to hold on to. Behind me, the shutter continued to click. Laughter rose and fell like waves. And I stood there, arms folded, body still, trying to convince myself that I didn't care. That this silence, their silence, was just noise I could tune out. But I did care. I cared in the way you care when you hand someone a piece of yourself and they drop it without looking. I cared because I had shown up, because I had brought something, myself, my effort, my energy, and it had been dismissed as background noise. I had baked for them, smiled for them, folded myself neatly into the edges of their lives, hoping to be seen. Instead, I'd been pushed to the fringe like clutter you hide before guests arrive. They hadn't screamed at me, hadn't cursed or insulted, but somehow this felt worse. Because it was quiet. And in that quiet was a message far louder than words. You don't belong. Not really. Not anymore. I wrapped my arms around myself. The breeze off the water was cool, raising bumps along my skin. A few dragonflies danced just above the reeds, wings catching light like bits of broken glass. I wondered how many other moments like this I'd quietly swallowed. How many reunions, birthdays, holidays I'd left early, smiling too wide, pretending I was just tired, just busy, just fine. I told myself for years that they were trying their best, that I was different, but different didn't mean unwanted. But today there were no excuses left. Today they'd said it without saying it. And the silence that followed wasn't absence, it was a choice. I closed my eyes and let the pain settle, not to wallow, just to know it, to feel it fully instead of pushing it down. Because sometimes the deepest wounds don't bleed. They echo. The sound of footsteps against the gravel path felt foreign, like an intrusion in the stillness I'd forced around myself like armor. I was mid-step, halfway down toward the lake, when the voice came, not loud, not demanding, just present. Hey, wait. I turned on instinct, already expecting one of them. Maybe Jason, summoned by guilt. Or worse, Madeline, come to sprinkle some manufactured grace on top of the mess she'd stirred. Instead, it was him. Luke. The photographer. He was threading his way down the slope, camera slung loosely against his chest, one hand shielding his eyes from the sun. There was something in his expression, not awkwardness, not obligation, but something focused, intent. If you're looking for the rest of them, I said, my voice sharper than I intended, they're up there posing like they're in a Ralph Lauren ad. He chuckled, and it wasn't a nervous chuckle or one trying to smooth the moment. It was warm, easy. No, I was looking for you. I stared at him, caught off guard in a way I hadn't felt in years. Me? He nodded, brushing a stray wisp of hair off his forehead. You're Brooke, right? I saw your name on the RSVP list. You run your own design agency? The surprise on my face must have been painfully obvious. Yeah, why? He shifted the weight of his camera as if cradling something delicate. I noticed you earlier, even before the photo sessions started. You've got this stillness, not the stiff kind, the kind that draws the eye. You don't try to take up space, but you hold it. That's rare. It wasn't a compliment in the performative sense. He wasn't trying to flatter. He said it like he'd observed it, like someone who knew how to see people for a living. I opened my mouth, then closed it. A decade's worth of protective layers fluttered to attention. Was this a setup? A joke? Some ironic gesture to placate the outcast? I'd love to take some solo portraits, he added gently. Real ones, just you. Something unspooled in my chest, not flattery, not vanity, something quieter, quicker. He must have seen the hesitation in my eyes because he tilted his head slightly and said, unless you'd rather not. It was the way he said it. No pressure, no pity, like I had a choice, like my presence mattered. Sure, I said. The word barely passed my lips before I even fully believed it. Why not? He didn't lead me back up toward the patio or the porch or the carefully curated chaos of the buffet. He guided me toward the side garden, an overgrown corner of Grandma June's property most people forgot existed. It was quieter here. Hedges unruly, roses blooming with reckless abandon, lavender tilting lazily in the breeze. The light slanted low through the leaves, catching dust motes in the air like flecks of gold. Stand here, he said, gesturing toward the weathered brick wall near the old garden shed. The light's doing something amazing right now. I took my place, unsure what to do with my hands, my posture, my face. Don't pose, Luke said, stepping back and lifting the camera. Just be. It was a strange directive, just be, as if that were something people did easily, as if being myself had ever been enough in this family or in any room they walked into. But he waited, no countdown, no artificial smile prompts, just silence, so I stood there. I let the wind move my hair, let my hands relax, let my weight shift naturally to one side. I didn't force a smile, didn't think about my angles, didn't perform. I just existed, in the kind of raw, uncertain way that felt both terrifying and liberating. Click. The sound of the shutter was soft, almost reverent. Click, click. He circled slightly to the side, never interrupting the silence, never telling me what to do. "You have a lot in your eyes," he said quietly behind the lens, "like you're saying 100 things but holding them just behind your teeth." I looked away at that, not because I was embarrassed, but because he wasn't wrong. He didn't push, just clicked again. The breeze stirred the garden, a bird called from a nearby tree, a bee floated lazily past, and I, who had been shamed into stillness an hour ago, was now being seen in my stillness. Not as a shadow of the family brand, but as a person with dimension. For the first time that day, maybe the first time in years, I felt whole in my skin. Not because someone had chosen to include me out of guilt, but because someone had noticed me as I was. Not dressed up, not edited, not explained. Just me. And it felt like the first small inhale of air after holding your breath for far too long. Each shutter snap was a beat in the strange rhythm of reclamation. With every frame Luke captured, I felt something loosening beneath my skin. Not the polished pride I imagined I'd feel in a moment like this, but something subtler, steadier. A settling. The air was thick with sunlight, that rich, late-afternoon warmth that makes everything look like it belongs in a memory. My hair whipped occasionally across my face, and I didn't bother to smooth it. I let it be, let me be, raw and real. My arms remained crossed, my feet bare in the grass, anchored to the ground I'd once tiptoed across as a child too afraid to make noise. Now I stood in the same spot, immovable. Luke moved like he was painting, not photographing, circling slightly, adjusting his position, waiting for the moments between my breaths. His silence was deliberate, respectful. He wasn't trying to coax anything from me. He was allowing it to rise naturally, and I let it. I hadn't realized how starved I'd been for this kind of attention. Not the spotlight, not the applause, but the gaze. The kind that doesn't look through you or over you, but into you. Luke's lens didn't shrink me, it affirmed me. Then came the sound of gravel crunching, footsteps, hesitant at first, but then more deliberate. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I felt them gather. First on Grace, always the observer, now squinting like she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Then Madeline, crisp, curated Madeline, appearing like a storm cloud against the golden light. Her tones snapped like brittle glass. What's going on? Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, the clipboard long abandoned, replaced now by tension and confusion. She wasn't used to being out of control, and this scene, this moment she hadn't orchestrated, unsettled her. Luke didn't flinch. His camera didn't lower. He kept shooting as if her presence was background noise. "Capturing the most authentic energy I've seen all day," he said smoothly. The air shifted, a ripple subtle but undeniable. Madeline blinked, like she'd just walked into a room mid-conversation. "You're doing portraits of her?" Her voice sharpened on the last word. That single syllable carried everything: disbelief, disapproval, displacement. Luke paused, lowering his camera just slightly, not in submission, but in quiet command. "Of course," he said. "She's magnetic. The way she carries herself, there's depth. Character. It's rare." And just like that, the world tilted. Not drastically, not with fanfare, but with the soft seismic shift that happens when truth is spoken aloud in a place where it's been buried for too long. Silence swallowed the lawn. Aunt Grace said nothing. Her mouth tightened as if debating whether to retreat or engage. Jason, who'd wandered closer with a plastic cup in hand, froze halfway through a sip. Even Mom, who had mastered the art of quiet complicity, opened her mouth and closed it again. Madeline's eyes met mine. For a breath, I braced for the usual, the sharp-edged comment, the passive-aggressive deflection, the not-so-subtle dig. But none came. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw her falter. Not because I was doing anything extraordinary, but because I was doing nothing. No explaining, no apologizing, no shrinking. I simply stood in the center of the garden, barefoot and wind-touched, refusing to fade into the background. She had no script for this version of me, no ready lines to reduce it. So she said nothing. And that silence, it was worth more than 1,000 apologies. It wasn't victory in the traditional sense. There was no cheering, no dramatic collapse of ego. It was quieter, more dignified. But it was mine. Luke resumed photographing as if the interruption had been a passing breeze. The shutter resumed its rhythm, sensing now with the steadiness in my chest. I didn't smile for the next shot. I didn't need to. There was power in neutrality, in not performing for anyone. I met the lens the way I'd met Madeline's gaze, calm, unflinching. Because I finally understood something: you don't have to fight to belong where you already do. The people who see you, truly see you, don't require performance. They don't ask you to step aside or out or down. They ask you to stand still. And in that stillness they find something extraordinary. Click. The moment was sealed, not just in the photograph, but in the air. And I knew without question that every single person watching, even if they never admitted it, had just witnessed a shift. A reclaiming. Not loud, but irrevocable. The portraits arrived in a zip folder titled Brook, Garden Light. Even the name felt poetic, like a gentle affirmation that something luminous had bloomed in a space once marked by shadows. It had been exactly 7 days since I stood barefoot in Grandma June's side garden, while the rest of my family played dress-up for a legacy I no longer felt tethered to. 7 days since Luke pointed a lens at me and somehow captured not just what I looked like, but who I was becoming. I'd opened the files on my laptop with cautious curiosity, bracing for the usual inner critic to rear her head, the one trained by years of backhanded compliments and exclusion, the one who measured worth by acceptance. But she never arrived. Instead, I stared. And for the first time in my adult life, I saw me. Unfiltered, unforced, entire. There was a photo of me standing with my arms folded, chin slightly lifted, gaze direct but not hard. Another where I'm laughing, not the polite photo-op smile I'd mastered over the years, but something looser, lighter, like I had finally exhaled. And then the one that made my breath catch. I was looking off to the side, eyes soft, hands at my sides, hair wind-blown and wild. It didn't look staged. It looked free. I selected that one, printed it, framed it in the same silver-edged frame I'd kept boxed away since Dad passed, the one I never felt worthy of using because no photo ever seemed to deserve that kind of reverence, until now. I mailed it to Grandma June with a short note. "Thank you for the garden, I found myself there." She called 2 days later. Her voice cracked before she said a word. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't see, I'm sorry." There was a long pause. Not heavy, just fragile. The kind of silence that trembles at the edge of something long overdue. "I should have said something at the reunion," she continued, her voice brittle with age and regret. "I saw them push you out. I did nothing." I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me like rain after drought. "I'm okay," I said gently, really. And I was. Not because it hadn't hurt, it had, but because healing had found me in an unexpected form. Not through apology or validation from the very people who erased me, but through the realization that their permission had never been required. Madeline never reached out. Predictable. She was too tightly wound in the machinery of her own image to allow for the discomfort of accountability. Jason sent a single text. "You looked amazing." 3 words, no punctuation, no follow-up. It wasn't enough. Not for closure, not for brotherhood. But I didn't need it to be. I had stopped waiting. I uploaded a few of the portraits to my design agency's portfolio under a section labeled Authenticity in Focus. I didn't frame them as a personal story. I let the images speak. About vulnerability, visibility, and the quiet strength of being seen on your own terms. And they did. My following doubled within a week. Clients reached out not to compliment the lighting or layout, but to say things like, "This feels real. This is the kind of work I want my brand to stand for. You remind me of myself." And then came the podcast invite, a women-led platform focusing on creative integrity and personal narratives. They'd seen the portraits, read my updated bio. They wanted to talk about design, yes, but more than that, they wanted to talk about resilience. It was surreal how fast it unfolded. One moment, I was the girl asked to step out of a photo. The next, I was being invited to step into a conversation that mattered. Not because I'd changed, but because I'd stayed. Stayed true to my instincts, to my craft, to the soft, steady voice that told me, even in the loneliest moments, you are not less because they don't see you. You are not less because they didn't choose you. You are whole. It was a revelation. They tried to crop me out. But instead of fighting my way back into their frame, I built a new one. Wider. Truer. Mine. And in it, I was not the extra, not the afterthought. I was the subject, the light, the story. The background didn't matter anymore, because I had become the entire picture.